All right, welcome again, Rabbi Joseph. It's good to see you. I know you are not feeling 100% and feeling every one of your 50 years. So I will.
Oh, I thank you. I would have passed on my 50 years, but of the rabbinate. Um, yeah, I think being in conversation is a source of profound health, intellectual and spiritual for me. So being in this conversation with you, Jason, fills my heart with at least an hour of hope a week.
Aw. It's interesting. So Tony Jones and I are both very hard Enneagram eights, and some would say have the same exact personality. And so I don't know what it says about you that you surround yourself with Gentiles who are eights.
First of all, not mere Gentiles, ordained Christians uh, who each in their own way struggles with the call. I think that's essential. I am both attracted to and attractive for uh, like minded individuals for whom the call is a burden. This is not a simple kickback, uh, do what I need on the day of the sermon, and let's just leave the rest to God.
Hmm.
No, we're tragically engaged.
That's good.
It goes back to that wonderful moment in Scripture, Exodus 3. Moses is a shepherd for his father in law, a guy on the lam, as it were. And he stops. Well, what's this? I need to look. That's it. That is what happens when you're called. You stop, you realize you can't turn away. And the next thing you know, God says, take off your shoes and stay a while.
I got a thing for you to do. Yeah. Speaking of the call, you sent me an article that you would like to talk about entitled The New American Judaism. Rabbis are in short supply, congregations are struggling, but Jewish life is still thriving. Where was this article originally published?
In the Atlantic,
Okay.
most recent, at least I don't know if it's in the magazine, but it was online, and in my circles is getting a lot of play. Her father is a noted and notable Orthodox rabbi, as she references in the essay. It's sociology, it's some cultural anthropology. There's no news here.
Mm-hmm.
Jews are aware that there is a institutional contraction taking place.
Okay, that's so all right. So briefly summarize some of the details in the article, because I think I've thought. I mean, long before you and I started talking, I have thought that the synagogue in America offers a model for the future of the church in America, in terms of how to get smaller.
All right, so let's start with the word synagogue, and we'll do some of our interfaith dialogue. Synagogue is Greek, and it means house of gathering. It does not appear in Hebrew Bible. It does appear in Christian scripture. So its origin is somewhat lost in antiquity. Could it have been created maybe in the first exile? We have Psalm 137, there by the waters we sat. Okay, synagogue means house of gathering. So the first Hebrew idiom for synagogue is Beit Knesset, house of gathering, a community center, a social center. Okay. Secondarily, Beit Midrash, house of study. Only finally is it a Beit Tfilah, a place for worship, because worship developed over several centuries with the fall of the temple. There is no reason to have a place of worship while you have a temple, a priesthood, and sacrificial cult. So everyone needs to understand the synagogue is post-biblical, it's rabbinic, and evolved. It is inherently diaspora, though its origin may be in Babylon. We get the sense that Jesus and his disciples had something. We have ancient synagogues all over the place in Israel that they have excavated. They were doing something in these buildings. They did not have a prayer book yet. They may have taken the Torah scroll out, read it, taught it, discussed it.
And then tried to throw the speaker off a cliff.
And then the goat. So this is an institution that has evolved in purpose. And why do I go back to its definition and purpose? We are at a transitional point in the cultural anthropology of diaspora Jewry.
It's a good, that was helpful to me, though, because there's a synagogue in DC on 6th and I that hosts concerts and lectures and things of that sort that my wife and I have gone to quite a number of times. And
do you remember the name of the synagogue?
No, because the email list is 6th and I. But yeah, so I've seen Jason Isbell and other people play there, but so your unpacking of the context of the origins shows that this isn't. There's some ways in which they've structured the life of the synagogue is very faithful to what you just said in terms of being gathering place.
And there are in America synagogues which coexist in a Jewish community center. They may have been created simultaneously. True here in Brazil also.
That's good. Okay, so go back to the transition now in diaspora Judaism.
Okay, so lo and behold, as Jews came from Europe in the middle of the 18th century, German Jews came. And they brought with them a nascent American form of what we call today Reform Judaism. And they came to port areas, okay, Charleston and Cincinnati and what have you. And they, the Germans, attempted to maintain that idea of being Jews and Americans. That was an essential balance. And so those synagogues, and there are some of the original synagogues still here, Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. Those synagogues often had Sabbath services on Sunday morning, not Friday night or Saturday morning, because they were being American Jews, Jewish Americans. Okay. Eastern Europeans came next between 1880 and 1920, and they brought neo-Orthodoxy, what would become in America conservative Judaism. Those immigrants were not going to become part of Reform Judaism. They became conservative, modern Orthodox. Over American history's evolution, the two largest movements, Reform and Conservative, built great institutions. The Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, has campuses in Cincinnati, New York, Los Angeles, and Jerusalem. The conservative movement has the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. At one point had a Los Angeles and Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was a movement called Reconstructionism, an offshoot of conservative Judaism. They have a seminary at Temple University in Philadelphia. Then Yeshiva University, the largest Orthodox. So those were the big institutions, and they were big. Big libraries, big faculty, and lots of money. That ended, the expansion, that ended in the year 2000. There'll be all kinds of sociological studies that attempt to explain birth rates, population shifts, assimilation, interfaith marriage, lots of things. By the 2010s, the writing was on the wall. You can't afford the institutions you built for the size of the community you're now supporting.
Yeah.
And we're finding that everywhere. State universities, all on the verge of constant bankruptcy. So, Telushkin's basic point is the Jewish community that created the great historical institutionality of Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Orthodox. Her father was an Orthodox rabbi. That has contracted. I served a small community in Michigan City, Indiana. I served a larger community in Chicago. The small community in Michigan City can no longer afford a full-time rabbi. They have a non-resident rabbi that comes in from Chicago. The congregation I served in Chicago, which was historic, is on the verge of total collapse. The super congregation in Minneapolis is thriving because it's in a strange category of its own called metropolitan. It has so many zip codes that it continues to draw because of its services. But what it offers in services, the number of clergy, camp, cemetery, etc., there are many of those. Many people don't want that anymore. And that's what this essay begins to develop. I don't think it asks all the right questions. It begins to allude what has happened, the demographic shift, the economic shift, and now a completely new generation of adults. The adults that we raised in these congregations that wanted these services. Supplemental religious school. The vast majority of these now Jewish adults did not go to day schools. These are the grandchildren of the immigrants, the great-grandchildren of some of the immigrants. And they are Jews. But what they know and what they do has contracted. So they need less of what you offer. And they can get it elsewhere. The one thing the Jewish community could not have imagined. This is a synagogue. I can watch it on TikTok, YouTube.
Yeah.
So, close a synagogue during the pandemic. Close a few more synagogues because you have to do live shooter training in them. Divide a community over issues of anti-Semitism and Israel. Make the cost of training rabbis, which has now become politicized in the community over questions of the majority of ordained rabbis are now non-traditional. That is, not like I went to college and I went to graduate school, rabbinical school. Then I did doctoral studies. No. These are people who had careers and then stopped and saw the burning bush.
Mm.
They can't pick up a whole family, move to Israel for the first year, then move to wherever your seminary is. Oh, we're having online seminaries.
It's
okay.
This is helpful because it's we tend to be so insular, both in the Christian world and in like United Methodism, that we think these dynamics are unique to us, and therefore there's A, something we're doing wrong, and B, something we could be doing different to make it different. And you're just pointing out that these are shifts much bigger than either of our traditions.
And don't forget, Kuhn said, you don't know a paradigm shift is happening until it's past. So that's why I said the value of the essay is it is describing something, a moment of transition, transformation. We've been in it a while. It is now continuing. And well, what should we do? No, wait. Some circumstances don't have solutions. They require conversations.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I've not been on the pulpit now since the year 2001. I don't know what the digital technology requires in my mind. What I need it. I'm addicted to it. I can't have conversations with Jason every week without it. But does that mean those who don't attend are virtually, and that's a difficult word, virtually experiencing God with me? And we've not had a lot of public conversations about religion and digital community.
Yeah, it's so I mean, I just I don't know that I have a theological rationale. I just relented and accepted people into membership who will only gather with us online.
Stay with that.
And that's I can't. It. And I just, at the end of the day, it was a very practical, pastoral. Like, there's a lot of shitty churches in America, and a lot of toxic Christianity. And if for whatever reason this is how people can stay in the fold, then okay.
But we're not doing what Tracy says we should do. Think about what we've been thinking about. We've not said, should we reflect on this?
Mm-hmm.
We have relented. We've financially capitulated. We've admitted the pandemic forced us. And now that we've offered it, we can't renege on it. Oh, you like coming and not getting in the car and driving 45 minutes? And, but now we can all be together, so goodbye?
Yeah, I don't know that we appreciated that nearly a year is more than enough time for people to develop new habits.
Another wonderful insight. Yes, we don't quote change on a dime, turn on a dime.
Yeah. And so, just speaking from my own experience, like before the pandemic, it seemed like, okay, like lots of people don't question giving several of hours of their Sunday morning to the church. And now it's like, wait, worship. And then you want me to hang out with people like in the, like the fellowship hall afterwards. Like, no, it's too much time.
Okay. So the church, the synagogue are significant, foundational, social focal points of American reality.
Yeah. There's a friend and parishioner who works in intelligence, and she was giving me a very dark prediction about the end of Pax Americana and our immediate future, and then she surprised me saying that's why religious communities are going to be so important in the future. And so
I think religious communities find themselves faced with global and local challenges simultaneously, for which we've not yet found the new discourse.
Yeah.
As we move deeper into the election cycle, if I were on the pulpit again, I would imagine a weekly moment of detoxifying prayer. No, I'm really serious. How can you go out there and live unless you have a place where you can wash yourself off? So, the essay is a snapshot. My daughter, the professional New York Times photo editor, says that word no longer has meaning, Dad. We don't have snapshots anymore. But Instagram doesn't work. It's a moment. And that's what I want to offer. This is a moment that is shared by American religions. Parenthesis, I don't know enough about American Muslim institutionality to be fully inclusive. We have overbuilt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was that? Demographic poor reading? Was that power and hubris? Was it we always thought that the Holy One, blessed be she, would keep the plate full enough if we spoke long enough?
I wonder if it's without realizing it, Jews were participating in the American Christendom project in the same way that mainline Protestants were.
Maybe.
Because we all overbuilt at the same time.
Post World War II, there was an expansion not just of the baby boom, but we needed to produce institutions of hope. That war had demanded of more families and a global academic, intellectual reversal of everything that had been taught up to that point. And now, what? There needed to be inclusive religion? Let's remember that it was only a decade after the war, while we were creating this image that is being now reduced, that we collectively, the religious leaders, were part and parcel of civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
I find it both hopeful and difficult to imagine religion garnering the leadership to do anything like that again.
So Shira writes here. So she is quoting David Wolpe, a recently retired
Wolpe, yeah.
Well, and so he a recently retired rabbi of Sinai Temple, a conservative synagogue in Los Angeles.
Huge, one of the flagships.
And so he was recalling something he heard from Simon Greenberg. I will never forget, he said to us, your job as a rabbi is to explain America to your congregants. For that generation of Jews, all committed and knowledgeable about Judaism, they needed to learn how to be Jews in this new land. For this generation, everybody is an American. That's not the issue. The issue is how, as an American, do you become Jewish? And that is a harder task because it is countercultural.
David is correct.
There was a there was a comedy on Netflix, a film that came out about a year ago about a Jew marrying a non-Jew, and it was a comedy. And I remember Leo Leibowitz's critique in Tablet of the movie was how incidental Judaism was to the lives of these Jews.
Yes. Look, I always thought that my role in people's lives was indispensable. It wasn't my ego. It was at moments, it was. I was their link to a tradition they wanted to sustain. The problem was that came at rare moments, what I call life cycle intersections. Birth, bar bat mitzvah, marriage, tragically divorce, and then death. But if you're only there for the sanctifying of life's moments, and you're not there for study, worship, communal activity, you can't have big institutions. You don't have the wherewithal, not just financially, but staff-wise, to sustain a community of 6.5 million, some say 7 million Jews. The issues of assimilation, what Wolpe correctly says. Should you quote what everyone reads every day? Do they need a commentary to Tom Friedman, to Bret Stephens? Should you quote what you know best? Torah or the Talmud? What was that tonight, Rabbi? Where do you expect us to actually use whatever Baba Batra is? Oh, okay, so you're caught. Do you want to use their tradition and be solely relevant, or do you want to give them access to the, quote, eternal tradition, the texts that sustain them, and help them slowly acquire access to that tradition? Among the things I'm proudest of was to have created a Saturday morning Torah study group at Temple Israel in Minneapolis. And when I visit, I still get 60 people. That the idea is not one or the other, but both. Yep. And how do you find the balancing point? And Wolpe was great at doing what he did, but he also got caught in some political backfires between some politically conservative, powerful members of Sinai Temple and what he was trying to help the congregation acquire. To be a contemporary clergy person of any, quote, main line, you and I are main line. We share being literally on the same street. One of the things in Minneapolis is Hennepin Avenue contained Episcopal, Methodist, Catholic, and Jewish, all within 5 blocks of each other. The biggest of those churches. What does it mean to be mainline today? I think that's a part both of what Telushkin is warning us, what you just quoted from David Wolpe. I don't know how much longer we can use that term.
Yeah.
I think people have a mall mentality, which has morphed with Amazon. They want their niche, their category of needs.
And there's, and I think this is a dynamic for both of our traditions, but it's more obvious, I think, for you. Shira writes, the work of being a rabbi has also become more contentious. 3/4 of non-Orthodox Jews now marry a non-Jewish partner. When rabbis decline to perform interfaith marriages or to allow non-Jewish family members ritual roles in synagogue, those decisions are often received as intensely personal stubs. When rabbis embrace these changes, however, they can leave more traditional congregants feeling betrayed. I think one of the differences between, like mainline Christians, I don't think feel the need to guard, protect, cultivate their tradition. I don't know how many people I've had on the podcast who tell me like, oh, well, I grew up Methodist and now there's something else. And that's not a dynamic that's as present for us as it is for you. But if I were to draw a line like that would be that would be a very contentious thing to do.
Yes, being a rabbi in the last quarter century of the 20th century began with a significant vote of the Reform Rabbinate about officiating at interfaith marriage. I have never done one. I don't know. I don't say that with pride or any kind of rancor. It was generational. 60% of my colleagues today do it under certain circumstances. The last many years of my rabbinate, I found a compromise of sorts. When my congregation understood that as early as 1987, prior to the legalization of marriage for gays and lesbians, I had already blessed their unions. They said, if you're so clever that you can do that, can't you find a way not to reject our kids? So I did find a compromise. I said, if they get married legally, civilly, even if I attend that civil marriage, I can then come up as a married couple and bless them, speak to them, and acknowledge some Jewish ceremonial act with them. That seemed to pacify those who were most upset with me. When I retired, my successor made the choice to be a senior rabbi who does interfaith marriage. But she doesn't do it under all circumstances. Mm-hmm. And she won't co-officiate with ministers. So her big change confused the ministerial council with whom she's a member. So The circumstance of interfaith marriage for Reconstructionist, Reform, and conservative rabbis is a significant transformational shift in what American Judaism looks like. Who are those children? Well, you're talking to someone many of my colleagues see as having ruined Judaism. I helped formulate what is called patrilineal descent, that Jews born of a Jewish father are equal to those born of a Jewish mother. Most Reconstructionist Reform rabbis accept that prima facie default, that we don't make a distinction anymore. That is still a problem in conservative Judaism. Look, you can only push against social reality for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And then people stop coming. They say, okay, fine, we get it. This is not acceptable. And they either buy the product somewhere else or they do without the product. And that is part also of what she's talking about. There are now many new forms of, quote, there's something called renewal and non-mainline institutions, which have grown over the last 30 years or so, more mystical and all kinds of stuff. The mainline institution met historical, anthropological moment. Those are no longer binding for everyone.
Yeah.
The issue of the trans community has now become a reality in the Jewish community. And what do you do for a 13-year-old who is non-binary? You can't have a bar or bat mitzvah. You change the word. Now, if that child is not bar or bat, but they have a different word, are they somehow isolated, marginalized by a new term? Oh, everyone knows my child is non-binary. So do you change all the terms? Feels good to be retired sometimes.
Yeah, I was just but it's not. So Shira's article ends on a hopeful note. She writes, well, I guess depending on your vantage point, without any changes, seminaries will continue to wither and disperse, dismantling in a few years the communal infrastructure that took more than a century to build. Synagogues, especially those serving smaller and more remote communities, will continue to shrink, leaving more Jews without access to a rabbi or a religious community. Much good will come from the new institutions that exist outside the seminary, synagogue, and denominations. Their success is a sign that the future of Jewish life in the U.S. is strong. But for centuries, the synagogue and the congregational rabbi stood at the center of Jewish life. They allowed Jews of all sorts to come together to pray, worship, celebrate, argue, and mourn. If they disappear, they will be hard to replace.
I did not like her conclusion. I don't think she brings her journalism is fine, excellent. She doesn't bring the credentials to offer that conclusion. Not a sociologist. I think it's a moment where we don't know. This is happening. Yes, it's happening. We understand some of why it's happening. Some. We should sit down and think about this. Oh, excuse me, there's a war going on in Israel. Not all of the hostages have been freed, and the world seems to realize it forgot about how much they hate us. There is a leaderless vacuum everywhere. And we're going to take time to sit down and talk about, oh, the institutions we built, we overbuilt, they're closing. Bye. So I don't know that synagogues will close simply because they don't have rabbis. I think there will be a need for, and always has been a need for, lay people to become para rabbis. No reason to professionalize everything that can and needs to be done in the community institution. I'm not needed to lead a service. I'm not needed to teach scripture or Jewish history or Jewish. There are lots of people who have that knowledge, can acquire that knowledge, who can do it with each other. Okay. The law says an ordained clergy person must do a wedding. That's all the law says. The law says nothing about funerals. Law says nothing about, quote, naming a child. So the physicality of a synagogue won't end. It may need different sources of funding. Maybe this becomes, why does the Green Bay Packer team represent more and more of what I would like to hope could become an image for what communities should do? It's owned by Green Bay. It's not owned by billionaires.
Yeah.
Maybe the community at large needs to say, we want a synagogue. And we don't want it labeled. We want a synagogue. And we're going to have to figure out how to serve everybody in the community. And that will require lots of screaming and anger, and then we'll move on. It was that way for a long time.
Yeah.
But here's where I think this article is important. It is a warning as you go out into life right now. Please take notice of some things that you thought were simply always going to be. They're not always going to be. We've made choices. Kraft decided to have an ad about anti-Semitism. Not the ADL, not AJC. A billionaire football owner, entrepreneur, businessman decided he's so concerned he's going to pay for a Super Bowl ad. And you know what? He didn't make a very good one.
So as someone who never watches the Super Bowl, every year I hear people arguing about things that I don't. So I don't know anything about the Jesus commercials.
Yeah.
I don't know anything
Wash
about
my feet. Okay.
So why was it not a good? And
because again, they made the mistake that's always made. You err on the side of subtlety so as not to offend anyone. Oops, no one understood it.
Okay.
So they talked about Jew hate. Jew hate? What is Jew hate? Hatred of Jews. That works. But Jew hate, Jews hate something?
Well,
didn't want to use the word anti-Semitism because that has its own flashpoints.
So it occurred to me this week, and so we can talk about this next time or some other time. But there is in Christianity, in in Protestantism especially, there is a progressive reinterpretation of the Passion story to make it merely an injustice that we visit upon Jesus, rather than a sacrifice that is the work of Father, Son, and Spirit. Now, and it hadn't occurred to me, but because I've always got you in the back of my head now, I'm like, implicit in that reinterpretation is the assumption that the sacrifices of the Hebrew Bible weren't actually doing anything, and that's a rewriting of Judaism it crosses a line, I think.
Or it is a statement that the ultimate eschatological sacrifice was determined to be now, about which we don't have a lot of conversation, except at some point the second coming and the ultimate not yetness that we both share.
So we can talk more about sacrifice in a future conversation, because I think it's a subject that is unavoidable in the New Testament, but for some reason it's a subject that we don't talk much about as Christians.
And it's not a sacrifice. It's not, when Jews talk about sacrifice, and go back to the Toulouse essay, that is happening less. The Jews that have abandoned, that she's described, they want what they're not getting in the community. They want mysticism, dating, the best fusion Asian matzo balls. They want to hold on to the remnants, but they don't want to go back to the origins.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to get us too far afield. I mean, like, one of the other things that we're both battling, right, are spiritual felt needs that are produced by a culture that is adversarial to both of our traditions.
Absolutely correct. And when you point that out in the institution that is being frontally attacked, they who've come to you for an answer, how could you say that? What do you mean? I have a different vocabulary to offer you. What's the matter with the one I have?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I'm like, well, yeah. For Christians, it's like, well, Jesus says to pray only this way, and
really?
And Paul has a very dim view of spiritual practices, so we shouldn't forget that. But well, anyway, Rabbi, I hope you feel better and get well, and I will see you.
And
next
I
week.
will see you this Monday night.
Oh, that's right.
Our series.
Yes. So
it's coming up.
I'll be in touch with you about that, and I will see you Monday night, and I will see you Wednesday.
Good.